This stream is, we're building a Sudoku game. We're using Storybook to kind of drive the development process along. At some point, we need to upgrade to Angular 14. I'm excited to do that because I want to do some modulus components here in this project, but I don't think that's what we're going to do today. I've done a lot of upgrading videos lately, to be honest. I was going back through all my streams and I've done a bunch of them. So we'll do some new content tonight, but instead, let's get our storybook running. While that is building, let's just go over some reminders of kind of what we did last time. We've written stories for our cell component, and our cell component is pretty simple right now. We're going to be adding some more functionality to the cells themselves, but for now, really they're just an input that displays a number, and we can tell it that it's got an error. I'm thinking we're probably going to have to redesign this just a little bit. But the next big piece is the grid. And again, the grid, the HTML is super simple. The last stream was spent working out all of this CSS and getting the grid to display nicely. But at the end of the last stream, I noticed that we have some issues that I'll point out as soon as Storybook is done. I'm still very much learning Storybook. I really like this work process of starting with Storybook. And here we go. Here's our Storybook. As you can see, it's pretty simple right now. We've got a cell in an error state. We've got our typical primary cells where we can just enter numbers. And then we've got a grid. The grid itself should have numbers in it and some things like that. Unfortunately, it doesn't. And at the end of last stream, I realized why. You can see it right now. Let's refresh this. This is what it should look like. But as we navigate, we can see that has error. It's saying that it can't bind to ng model. Primary is throwing a ton of exceptions for the cell, and then the grid primary throws an error saying that it doesn't know what Sudoku or Sud cell is. Those are all issues with the module themselves. So part of the reason why we want to move into a modulus architecture is that this is one of the exact reasons we've talked about in the past. And you'll see this a lot in Angular. You'll see these errors, especially in testing. Like you'll see these, I've run unit tests where you'll see this exact error right here saying that it's not a known error for all the unit tests running. And I've seen it in many places. I don't know. Next time you run your unit test, pop open your console in the window that it opens up and just see what you see. If your company doesn't have those, I'm impressed. I'm very impressed. So let's clean up the ng model first. So if we look at the cell component, and we're using the scam architecture here, right? We've imported the forms module. However, we haven't told the story what that module is, and inside of our decorators, we should be able to add the module metadata. And inside of here, should be able to do imports, and we should be able to say common module. So if we come back to our story and we hit F12, we no longer have it complaining. I need to figure out what's going on here. So we've still got something broken with the primary. So let's go back to has error, and the grid is still broken too. So when we look at the grid, it still doesn't know what a Sudoku cell is. So let's fix that with the same module metadata decorator. So here in the store, we are going to add, wow, this is a really simple one. Decorators, and we're just going to give it the module. Uh-oh. There we go. And we are going to import the cell component module. Refresh this. Oh, actually, it was already there. That looks good. When we swap over here, we've still got some errors. So let's figure out what these errors are. Let's dock this to the side so that we can refresh. So we're good at this point. No, we're not. A listener indicated an asynchronous response by returning true, but the message channel closed before a response was received. I am uncertain what this means. But when that happens, it's breaking everything. We were getting the grid, but we're not getting the content inside of the grid.
This right here to me is probably one of the most useful things to watch someone noodle through, because I think, you can sit there and like code through something all day long, but once you come across an error, to try to figure that out, I think is one of the biggest challenges of being a programmer.
It really is, and it can be a big struggle. But they're saying that it could be my extensions. So we'll pause this. Let's see if that solves my issue. Oh, wow. Okay, so I did make a mistake in trying to bind the module, but at least now we can see it, and Ghostery looks like it's just causing a whole bunch of mess on Storybook, which means we're just going to leave it turned off. I don't really need it on their site. It's more for the people who don't play nicely on the web. Let's come back here. I made a mistake here. I imported the common module, but common module doesn't provide the ng model binding. It's in the forms module. So we'll pull that in. The story should rebuild. Okay, so there, that, and look at that. So we solved it. So that's the housekeeping that we needed to do. There were a bunch of errors in the console. We were able to solve all of them. We had an error that we weren't expecting. Luckily, Stack Overflow is a programmer's best friend, and Stack Overflow gave us a good idea of what needed to happen. Oh wow! Hey Chow,
Hey,
welcome to the
Joe.
stream.
Yeah.
It's good to have you here. Thank you so much. We want our Sudoku game to be kind of user-friendly, right? When a user comes to this cell right here, in Sudoku, we know that this grid is important, and then we know that this row and this column is important. Last week, we did a bunch of work relating to CSS. If we inspect the divs that we're using to wrap these, we have each of these divs is marked with a specific row and a column. So we can see that, all of these divs are in row 1, and then we've got the columns, and then we've got this grid 0-0 or 0-1. So all of these CSS classes in here. What I think we can do, and we'll try this out first because we're using CSS variables all over the place. What I think we can do is set the value for a CSS variable that we'll use to set the color for the row and the column and things like that. And then what we can probably do is go into all of these rows and columns, and we can probably use a special selector to do that. If we have an active input, then we'll set the CSS color to be something different and see what happens to our row. Let's experiment with row 1 and just see what we can do. I've been watching, I think he calls it Code with Kevin. He's amazing with CSS, and I've been watching him lately, and some of the stuff he's doing with CSS variables are very much informing what I'm doing here. We'll start out with the row color, and we'll just do it as transparent. We'll just do row -1. And what we need in row 1, we look at our markup. We'll have an input. We'll experiment. Maybe it's active. We'll try with focus and see what happens first. My thought is that if we go row 1 and then inside of row 1 we have an input as a child, then we can set the CSS variable for the row color and see what happens when we focus on row 1.
Sounds like you're saying Rogue One.
Rogue One. It was a good show, really good show. That was the
Totally.
first time when I honestly thought, there might be something to Vader being scary.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That last 5 minutes was awesome.
The first thing we haven't done is for row 1, we're going to set a background color. And we're going to grab var row color. We're going to set the input with the focus, and we're just going to say we want the row color to be green for now, just to see what happens if we do this. So if I click in row 1, nothing happens. If I click in row 2, nothing happened. Let's inspect and see what our issue is. We have this input. We have this div with the class row 1. Row 1 has the var background color set on it. If we come to this input and turn on focus, we come back to here. So we're definitely focused here, but our row color hasn't been changed. It's still transparent. Okay, so maybe it's not focus that we need. So if we look, when we click here, turn off the focus.
Go documentation.
Exactly.
It's so easy when you've got like so many different, tools and libraries and like just everything. It's
Absolutely.
hard to keep everything straight.
So now, row 1, we have focus within. And now I hear myself saying rogue 1.
You're not gonna not hear it now.
Exactly. So now we've refreshed. Row 1 doesn't, or row 0 doesn't do anything. Row 1 is only doing it for the cell that has the focus within. Need to expand it out to a bigger element. Because now we've managed to highlight the cell, which is kind of cool. But what we want is to change it for the entire row.
Okay, now hang on there. Why is it just one at a time? What did you do to make that one at a time? And is there a way to make it so the whole row is highlighted?
The way we did it is we set this row color to green, but it's scoped only to the element that has a focus within that is
I
also
see.
marked as row 1, right? I was hoping this would work without having to do JavaScript, because the one thing we could always do to make this work is on focus, we could grab the row element from the HTML and set that to be for the entire row, because each cell knows its X and Y location. So we could easily set this all up using JavaScript. I was hoping to do it only in CSS.
So you're like me. I love CSS.
Yeah, it's amazing what you can do with it. I mean,
It really is.
the fact that I was able to get this to show up green just because I added a simple line of CSS, right?
Yep.
And this is super simple. All I did was just change the variable color. If we look at our selector, right, we've got row 1, we've got the background color set to row color. When we hit the focus within, we're setting the row color variable to green. But because of the cascade, really this row color has been inherited by this selector, and we're changing the row color specifically for this selector. If, we could focus on all of them, then suddenly the whole row would be highlighted. I think what we're going to have to do is just add a focus event to the cell, which will emit to the parent grid. And then in the parent grid, we can use JavaScript to set row color to be our color. And that will make the entire row the color that we want. Actually, at this point, definitely need to fix that and commit that. And this was just some cleanup of missing modules. So let's come back to our cell component. Inside of here, our ESLint is saying that we shouldn't have empty lifecycle methods and that we shouldn't have an empty ng on init. I agree. We can add it back when we need it. So now we haven't implemented on init, so it's complaining, so we'll get rid of that too. Now we're mostly cleaned up. Now it's just saying we've imported something that we're not using. We save it, that goes away. Thank you, prettier. Our file is cleaned up. What we want to do is here in this input, we want a focus event, and we're going to say cell focused. We don't have this value. This is one of the things that I really like about WebStorm. WebStorm does it, and now I'm in and working on the cell focus that I just added. Really, all we need to do is just say, hey, this cell is focused. We'll just add an output to the cell. And we'll call this output cell focus. And it's just going to be a new event emitter And we're going to do it as a void event emitter. Really, we just care that the cell was focused on. Going to import the output, and we're going to input the event emitter. And that comes from Angular core. Oh. So we'll just call it self-focus received. Thank you, spell checkers, because I am not a good speller.
I before E, except after C.
Yep. And the teacher inside of you is probably screaming.
No. Oh my gosh, no.
So, okay, so now we've got an output on our cell. Now we can come back to our grid. When we add this cell, we already know the X and Y value. So inside of here, we can do on focus received equals, and we can just call this grid cell focused, and we'll have an X and a Y value because we will need to change a few variables. Did I not call that on focus received? Cell focus received.
Oh darn. Ah, I hate that when it's like
Yep.
it's like one word.
My memory is often short. The nice thing about this is we can pass in the X, Y value, create it, and inside of here, and let's go ahead and clean this up too. We've got an empty constructor and an empty ng on init that we really don't need. So we'll clean all of that up. It's also complaining about the empty method that we just added. And what are the other four? So it's mainly just complaining about this method we added that, yes, and it's saying, hey, you never use these variables. You're absolutely right. So let's use them. We want to set whatever row we're in, right? It's the row is the Y value. So it'll be row dash whatever. And we want to scope it specifically to that row, but we want to set the CSS variable to be our color. So what we want to do is we want to get a reference to that CSS variable. We know it needs to be row 1. We need a reference to the grid itself. Probably the best way to do it is just to grab a reference to itself through the constructor that I just deleted. And in the constructor, we are going to just grab a private read only element ref. We're just going to inject the element ref. Inside of element ref, we should be able to grab native element and grab the styles. I should be able to just grab styles from here. Is it get styles? And I need a this on element ref. And let's just console log this right now. And we'll just do cell focused. We'll give it the X and the Y. And we'll grab the styles and see what we get. And I do this a lot as I'm kind of fumbling my way through designs, just going in and seeing what I can grab. Sometimes I find it more useful to fumble my way through doing things. So we'll get the console up. We're definitely going to clear the console and let's focus here. And I'm not getting anything. We've still got our CSS there. It's like, wait, what happened?
You didn't
So
break it all the way.
I've got my grid focused. So in my cell component, I've got this output. So the first thing we can do, oh, you know those duh moments we were talking about earlier today?
Yes, I was having several of those all day today.
It helps if you emit something on your output. I hear that's a thing.
Does that usually help? Nice.
When things are broken, it's good to walk back through and just talk your way through it. So,
Make sure you did all the steps.
yeah.
I hear you.
Okay, so get styles is not a function. Great. Let's clear it and we'll log the native element and just see what that gives us. So, inside of here, get styles doesn't exist. And this, we're going to rename this to be host element. Um, and this should be just a grid component. Going to go into here and click there. And so when we clicked on the number 4. So that is definitely X3, right? 0, 1, 2, 3, because we're 0 based. We're in row 0. And we got our Sudoku grid. What we could do is this self-focused could set a value on the property, and then we could just do class dot row selected equals you know selected y is equal to y. And so when we come through and run this, what we would do is we would add a property, and then we would have the row selected class, and the row selected class we can style. And that's probably cleaner, I would say, than what we're doing here, where we're trying to grab, which cell is focused. We would
I,
just add these properties, right?
I can hear Joe Eames saying, yeah, like he would be using the NG class.
And selected y needs to be undefined or a number, and that equals undefined to start with, and selected x is a number, and that is also undefined. And here we would just set these two values, and I think that's probably a cleaner implementation, right? We've played around with a bunch of implementations and failed, and now it's time to actually do something. If we make these colors the same, right? If we do green across and down, then sure, it looks you'll be able to see from kind of the intersection where we are. What would be nice is if we had kind of the lighter color for the grid itself, a slightly darker color for the row and column, and then the darkest color for the actual cell that we're in. So then your eye is naturally drawn there, and then as you expand out, you can see the rest of what you're doing. Yeah, I think we're along the same lines, and I honestly think this is probably the cleaner implementation, because now we can come into the grid and we can add this row selected, and we can also add the um, um, column selected, right? Um, And then this should work. And change this over to be, and we don't need the div. And we can change it to start with row. So if the class starts with row, and we can even add in the dash just to be sure about it. We'll set the background color to that. Then if it also has the row selected class on it, we'll set the background color to, we'll do and we'll do something like that. So that should be a lighter green. Inside of the HTML, rather than doing two classes, what we can do is we can do attributes, and we can do selected, and inside of here, oh yes, good point. I should prefix it with data. So inside of here, what we're saying, do something like X I need my closing. That doesn't work. Yeah, definitely. Some of the things I need to do, like this calc grid class, should definitely be a pipe on X and Y, for sure. So if I do selected X, Y, X comma Y, and here we're going to return a string, and we're just going to return oops, and I don't need all of these braces. So now I've got a data element or an attribute. So I'm looking at this 9. When I click on that, I'm not getting the attribute set. My approach was broken. And yeah, I don't think I'm an Angular god by any stretch of the imagination. I'm just some guy who was crazy enough to start coding in front of people on Twitch. As I was looking through it, we could probably put all of this stuff on the Sudoku cell, because the Sudoku cell, when we look in the cell itself, we're setting the display block on the component. So the component is rendered as a block level thing. We can absolutely pull that off. Let's make that change in the grid. And that's part of the reason why I enjoy this, is because it's fun to have other people make sure that when you work on something by yourself, it's easy to, how do I want to say it? It's easy to get stuck. It's easier to get stuck in your own ways and think that your own ways are the right ways to go, right?
Well, it's kind of what we were saying earlier too. We're like, the only way to get as good as as the Angular gods is to like sit down and practice new things.